He controlled a third of the world's heroin supply. He commanded an army of 10,000 soldiers. The DEA wanted him dead or in chains. The Burmese government had tried and failed to destroy him for decades. The Thai military couldn't touch him. And in September of 1977, on a stormy monsoon night deep in the jungle hills where Burma blurs into Thailand, this man sat down and wrote a letter to the United States government. Not a threat, not a declaration of war, an offer. He was going to sell them his entire empire, every last kilogram of opium, gone, for one price. And the Americans were going to have to make a choice that would haunt their drug policy for the next 30 years. This is the story of Khun Sa, the opium warlord of the Golden Triangle, and the night he made the most audacious gamble in the history of organized crime. Before we get to the letter, you need to understand who Khun Sa actually was, because the DEA's version and the real version are very different stories. His real name was Chang Chi-fu, born in 1934 in a small village in the Shan states of Burma, to a Chinese father from Yunnan and a Shan mother from the hills. His father died when he was 8 years old. He grew up in chaos: the Japanese occupation, Burmese independence, the collapse of colonial order, in a region where every border was a suggestion and every alliance lasted only as long as the money did. And here's the thing about the Shan states that most people in the West don't know. When Burma became independent in 1948, the Shan people, a distinct ethnic group with their own language, their own culture, their own centuries-long history, were essentially absorbed into the new Burmese state without their meaningful consent. They were promised autonomy. They were promised the right to self-determination after 10 years. Those promises were broken, and what followed was 60 years of brutal civil war, government crackdowns, burned villages, and a mountain people fighting for the right to simply exist. Khun Sa was born into that war. By his early 20s, he had formed his first militia, initially with the support of the Burmese government itself, which found it useful to arm local strongmen to fight rival factions. He was useful to them, a weapon they thought they could control. They were wrong. In 1969, the Burmese army arrested him, threw him in prison. He sat there for 5 years, and you would think that would be the end of the story. A warlord without an army is just a prisoner. But Khun Sa's men kidnapped 2 Soviet doctors working in Rangoon and sent a message to the government: release our commander or the doctors disappear. The government released him. Right then, in that single move, you understand what kind of mind you are dealing with. Not a thug, not simply a criminal, a strategist. A man who understood that the most dramatic gesture often accomplishes what brute force cannot. By the mid-1970s, he had rebuilt his forces into the Shan United Army, declared himself the champion of Shan independence, and established a fortified headquarters at a place called Bon Hin Take, a sprawling complex of bamboo and timber structures right on the Thai-Burma border in the lush, fog-draped hills of the Golden Triangle. And he financed all of it: the guns, the soldiers, the roads, the schools he built for Shan children, the clinics in mountain villages, with opium. The Golden Triangle, for those unfamiliar, is the region where Burma, Thailand, and Laos converge, and for most of the 20th century, it was the source of the majority of the world's heroin. The mountain terrain made it nearly impossible to police. The local farmers had been growing opium poppies for generations. It was the only cash crop that could survive the journey down the mountain trails to market. And by the 1970s, Khun Sa had positioned himself at the center of that entire economy. At his peak, intelligence estimates credited him with controlling somewhere between 30 and 50% of the global heroin supply. Let that number sit with you for a moment. One man, in a bamboo fortress in the jungle, with 30 to 50% of the world's heroin. And here's the twist that makes this story genuinely complicated, genuinely worth your time. He didn't see himself as a drug lord. He saw himself as a revolutionary, a freedom fighter for a stateless people, a politician without a country, playing the only cards he'd been dealt. Was that self-serving? Absolutely. Was it also, in some uncomfortable way, true? That's what we're here to figure out. By 1977, the walls were closing in, slowly, but closing. The DEA had been running operations against his network for 4 years. American agents had penetrated some of his distribution channels, flipped some of his couriers, and were applying enormous pressure to the Thai government to do something about the heavily armed drug lord operating openly from Thai territory. Bangkok was caught in an impossible position. On one hand, Khun Sa's army was genuinely useful. It served as a buffer against Burmese military incursions and kept communist insurgent factions moving down from the north from gaining too much ground. The Thai military who dealt with him personally didn't just tolerate him, they liked him. He was smart, he was reliable, he kept his side of various arrangements, and his presence in the hills was strategically convenient. On the other hand, American money, American pressure, American officials making very clear that the relationship between Washington and Bangkok would be affected by how seriously Thailand took the drug problem on its northern border. Khun Sa tracked all of this with the precision of a man whose survival depended on reading political weather correctly. He had informants in Bangkok. He knew which Thai officials were under American pressure. He knew which DEA operations were being planned. And what he read in the autumn of 1977 was a forecast that should have terrified him. The Thai accommodation that had sheltered him for years was becoming too expensive. Sooner or later, Bangkok would have to move against him to satisfy Washington. A lesser man might have panicked, might have retreated deeper into Burma, tried to hide, waited for the storm to pass. Khun Sa decided to do something completely different. He decided to make an offer. Picture the scene. September 1977. The monsoon is hammering the teak forest, red earth running in rivers down the mountain slopes, the jungle steaming in the dark. Khun Sa sits alone at a heavy wooden desk, white shirt, cuffs rolled up. On the desk, a glass of green tea, a kerosene lamp throwing long shadows on the bamboo walls, a loaded pistol, and a stack of rice paper.
He has dismissed his guards from the room. He wants no witnesses, because even he isn't entirely sure, until the pen meets the paper, whether he's actually going to do this. The letter is addressed to the United States government. Here is what it says, and brace yourself, because this is where it gets genuinely mind-bending. He offers to sell them his entire opium stockpile. Not destroy it, sell it. The number most consistently cited in subsequent reporting is somewhere around $100 million. In exchange, he will hand over every kilogram of raw opium he controls, remove himself from the drug trade entirely, and, the unstated implication hanging over every line of the letter, gain a degree of legitimacy that would transform his political status overnight. But here's where it gets really interesting. The letter also contains an argument, a policy argument, the kind of argument you'd expect from a think tank analyst, not a jungle warlord. He points out, calmly, logically, that if the United States is genuinely interested in eliminating the opium supply from the Golden Triangle, rather than simply being seen to pursue it, then buying and destroying his stockpile would be demonstrably more efficient and more humane than 30 years of interdiction and prosecution that had succeeded mainly in raising the street price of heroin in American cities while leaving the underlying agriculture of the Shan Hills completely unchanged. Farmers grow opium, he argues, because it is the only crop that can be carried over mountain trails to a market. Until there are alternative crops in alternative markets, they will always grow it. No amount of DEA agents, no amount of Thai military operations, no amount of pressure on Bangkok will change that fundamental economic reality. He is not, he suggests, with a delicacy that must have cost him considerable effort, the problem. He is a symptom. And then, the boldest line, he implies that the Americans have never actually wanted to solve the problem, because a solved problem is a problem you can't use as justification for budgets, operations, political capital. He seals the letter, hands it to a courier who will carry it to Chiang Mai, from where it will find its way through carefully cultivated channels toward American ears. Then he pours himself another cup of tea, and he waits. The world's response? Silence. And the silence said everything. The letter arrived, this is documented, American officials acknowledged years later and with various degrees of discomfort that it had been received, seriously considered, and declined. The DEA's position was clear. To purchase the stockpile would be to legitimize Khun Sa, to acknowledge him as a negotiating partner, to admit that the drug war had a pragmatic transactional dimension that was incompatible with the moral clarity that anti-drug policy required. There were also practical concerns. Was the offer genuine, or was it a sophisticated intelligence operation to identify American agents? Could he actually deliver what he claimed? And what administration could survive the political fallout of writing a $100 million check to the most famous drug lord on Earth? These weren't unreasonable questions, but here's the thing. Khun Sa had expected them to say no. Think about it. A man this smart, this experienced in the mechanics of power, knew the Americans couldn't accept the offer. Washington saying yes was never the point. The letter wasn't addressed to Washington. It was addressed to the Shan people, proof that their leader had attempted the door of legitimate politics before it was kicked off its hinges by someone else. It was addressed to the Thai press, which covered it with fascinated attention. It was addressed to the foreign correspondents in Chiang Mai, who filed dispatches to newspapers from London to Sydney. It was addressed to the broader world in which he was trying to construct a narrative. I am not a criminal. I am a statesman without a state, and I have tried to make peace. Some reporters noted that his arguments about purchasing versus interdicting the supply bore a striking resemblance to arguments being made simultaneously by legitimate policy researchers. Others noted that a man with 10,000 soldiers and effective control of a region larger than many European countries was conducting foreign policy from a mountain base in northern Thailand. The gap between those two observations, that uncomfortable space between the policy analyst and the drug lord, was exactly where Khun Sa lived, and he lived there deliberately. 18 months after the letter, the moment of reckoning came. The Thai government, under renewed American pressure, facing a DEA operation that had been building for 2 years, making a cold calculation about where its interests now lay, finally moved against him. It was the most significant Thai military and police operation ever mounted against Khun Sa directly. Combined forces, months of planning, descending on Ban Hin Tak in the gray hours before dawn. They arrived to find the fires still burning, rice still cooking in the pots over the coals, documents on the tables seemingly abandoned in haste, and no one there. Khun Sa had left 3 days earlier, moving through mountain trails his soldiers had been quietly improving for exactly this contingency, slipping across the Burmese border with a small escort, establishing himself in new positions in the hills above the Salween. His soldiers, forewarned by his intelligence network, had melted into the jungle with their weapons and supplies before the Thai forces arrived. The operation that had been planned for months, leaked through diplomatic channels he monitored, executed with the full weight of Thai military coordination, had taken a heavily fortified compound with nobody in it. He had given them the stage set and walked off with the entire company. It was not an accident. Every detail, the warm rice, the carefully selected documents left behind, the fires still glowing, was a message, delivered not in words, but in absence. You cannot catch what you cannot see. And from his new position across the border, which he would name Homong, and which would grow over the next decade into the capital of a Shan state in everything but international recognition, complete with its own currency, courts, customs administration, and radio station broadcasting in the Shan language, he had the letter of 1977 translated into Thai and Shan and circulated among his soldiers and the villages he administered. Here is the offer we made. Here is what they said. And here is what that silence means about what they want. A rejection transformed into a recruitment document.
Khun Sa would spend the next 2 decades at Homong, building what was essentially a functioning nation-state. His Hmong Thai army peaked at over 20,000 soldiers. The Shan independence cause attracted international attention, and the heroin kept flowing. Through the 1980s, his network supplied an estimated half of all heroin entering the United States at its peak. People died because of what he moved through those mountains. People died in Detroit, in Chicago, in Glasgow, in Sydney. This is not a detail to be glossed over. The human cost of what Khun Sa built was real and staggering. And yet, he also built hospitals, schools, roads through the Shan Hills where no roads had existed. He administered justice for villages that had never known anything but the arbitrary violence of competing armies. He funded a genuine political movement for people who had genuine political grievances. The Burmese government's treatment of the Shan people, forced labor, village burnings, mass displacement, was and remains a documented atrocity. These things coexisted in him, the warlord and the statesman, the killer and the builder, the man whose product destroyed families across the globe, and the man who genuinely, by all available evidence, believed he was fighting for his people. He surrendered to the Burmese government in 1996 at age 62, a negotiated arrangement that allowed him to retire to Yangon, immune from prosecution, in a comfortable villa. The DEA never got him. No court ever tried him. The Burmese military never defeated him. The Thai operation of 1978 found warm rice in empty pots. He died in 2007, stroke, 73 years old, in the city of the government that had once imprisoned him, then watched him build a private empire and walk away. So what do we do with a man like Khun Sa? The easy answer is to call him a monster and move on. The harder answer, the more honest answer, is that he was something more complicated and therefore more disturbing than a monster. He was a man produced by a world that had already decided the rules didn't apply to the Shan Hills. A world where the CIA moved opium on aircraft, where governments armed warlords for convenience and then acted shocked when the warlords grew too powerful to control, where the drug war was fought with press releases and interdiction operations that everyone in the room knew would not actually solve anything. In September of 1977, on a monsoon night in a bamboo room in the jungle, he put all of that on the table, clearly, honestly, with the logic that still makes policy researchers uncomfortable today. They said no. He folded the rejection into his understanding of the world, and he moved on. The story always continued.